Imagine standing on a hill and watching a giant fireball rise into the sky, so bright and so violent that you could see it from miles away. Black smoke twisted upward like a dark tornado, climbing 100 meters into the clouds. On the ground below, a Russian fuel train carrying 660,000 liters of diesel and jet fuel had just been turned into a rolling inferno. But this was no ordinary strike. This train was deep behind Russian lines, 35 kilometers into what should have been safe territory. Russia thought it was untouchable. 4 Ukrainian drone pilots were about to prove them wrong, using machines that cost less than a laptop but carried the power of an army. The mission belonged to a Ukrainian unit called Ronin. Their job was simple on paper but nearly impossible in practice: hit a moving train that was heavily guarded and protected by some of Russia's best defenses. Standard drones can barely reach 3 kilometers, maybe 5 on a good day. These pilots were flying theirs over 15 kilometers, and that was just the beginning. They weren't alone either. This wasn't just a group of pilots with a few toys. It was a carefully planned operation involving 4 different teams working together. Ronin would handle the attack drones. A group called Cobble 9 had tracked the train for weeks, knowing its exact schedule and even the layout of its cars. Alpha Unit was intercepting Russian communications, listening in on every move. And then there was Next Group, the counter-jamming specialists, who were ready to break holes through Russia's electronic defenses. What was about to happen wasn't just an attack. It was a full orchestra of precision, timing, and raw courage. 15 kilometers into the flight, disaster struck. The pilot's video feed suddenly turned to static, like an old TV losing signal. Their repeater drone, which carried the communication link, had just been blown out of the sky by a Russian Verba missile. Without it, the attack drones were flying blind. The mission seemed doomed. For a moment, panic set in. But then a backup repeater came online, hovering lower and weaker, but still alive. The signal returned, grainy and shaky, but usable. The mission was back on, even if it was hanging by a thread. As the drones pushed deeper, they entered what pilots call an electromagnetic nightmare. Russia had rolled out its R-330ZH jamming truck, a beast that floods the airwaves for 15 kilometers in every direction. In theory, nothing should have survived inside that wall of interference. But Ronin's pilots had trained for this exact moment. Their drones were programmed with frequency hopping, bouncing 40 times per second across different channels, slipping through cracks in the Russian noise like water through a sieve. For long seconds, the pilots were flying blind, staring at static, relying only on memory and instinct. 15 seconds forward, turn right. 10 more seconds, climb over the power lines. It was like navigating in complete darkness with only a clock and a map in your head. Every mistake could mean crashing into the ground before ever reaching the target. But even that wasn't enough. Next Group had to join in. They switched on their counter-jammer, a powerful directional beam that cut a 30-second hole through Russia's electronic shield. It worked like a scalpel, carving open a path, but it also gave away their position, lighting them up on Russian radar like a bonfire in the night. Artillery could have rained down within a minute. The Ukrainians knew they had less than 45 seconds before shells started flying, so they timed it perfectly, running their beam for 30 seconds, just enough to push the drones through, and then cutting it off before Russian gunners could fire back. Risky, yes, but it worked. The Russians weren't finished. Their Krasika 4 system locked onto the control signals and quickly brought in a Pantsir S-1 air defense system. Within seconds, the radar locked on, and the cannons prepared to fire. But the Ukrainians had another trick up their sleeve. Decoy drones, cheap, disposable machines, each worth maybe $200, but fitted with reflectors that made them appear huge on radar. The Pantsir fired 8 missiles at the decoys, each one worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. All it did was clear the skies for the real attackers. By the time the decoys were gone, the Pantsir had only 4 missiles left and needed 20 minutes to reload. Worse for the Russians, the Ukrainian drones had dropped to just 10 meters above the ground, skimming over fields, threading through trees, and weaving under power lines. At that height, the radar couldn't track them. The Russians were blind. At just 2 kilometers out, the train activated its final defense. A Pole 21 jammer mounted directly on the cars. GPS signals vanished. Compass readings spun in circles. Even the drone's altimeters started to fail. The electronic fog was total. But there was one weakness. Analog video never fully dies. It gets worse and worse until it's nothing but snow. But tiny outlines still bleed through. On their screens, through walls of static, the pilots could still just barely make out the faint lines of railroad tracks. That was all they needed. Those tracks became a glowing road, guiding them straight to the target. At 10:32 in the morning, the first drone slammed into the third fuel car behind the locomotive. Its warhead, built from an RPG-7 rocket, punched through steel and ignited 60,000 liters of diesel in a single blast. The train's emergency brakes kicked in, locking the wheels. 30 seconds later, the second drone hit the fourth car. Fire spread backward, linking the inferno. The third drone flew blind through choking smoke, trusting memory more than sight, and struck dead center into the seventh car. The final drone, the last of the squadron, had the hardest task, diving through collapsing wreckage and fire to reach the final tanker. The pilot counted the seconds, guessed the distance, and dove. A second later, the last intact fuel car exploded, sealing the fate of the train. All 11 tankers were now burning, flames shooting 100 meters into the sky. The rails warped and bent, the ties cracked and crumbled. The fire raged for hours, leaving behind nothing but twisted metal and scorched earth. The supply line was crippled, out of action for days. In just minutes, 4 small drones had destroyed millions in fuel and infrastructure. The cost of the attack was shockingly small. 4 attack drones and a handful of decoys cost around $12,000 in total. In return, Ukraine destroyed more than $3 million worth of Russian fuel and left their supply line useless for 72 hours. But the real cost wasn't in money. It was in what the attack revealed. No place is safe anymore. Yesterday, Ukraine could hit 35 kilometers deep. Tomorrow it might be 50. Next week, 100. Russia now has to live with the fact that even its rear areas, even the supplies it thought untouchable, are targets. This wasn't just about one train. It was about the future of war. 4 hobby-grade drones carrying improvised warheads had outsmarted some of the most advanced electronic defenses on the planet. They slipped past radars, jammers, and missiles. They flew blind, guided by nothing more than static-filled screens and the nerves of their pilots. They rewrote the rules of the battlefield, proving that billion-dollar systems can be beaten by brains, teamwork, and courage. The fire from that single train lit up the sky for 6 hours. But what it really lit up was the future. In modern war, distance is no longer a protection. Rear lines no longer mean safety. 4 drones, 4 pilots, and a little bit of nerve showed the world that even deep behind enemy lines, nothing is safe anymore.